pardon my stealing a film line, the force is with us.
On the military side, I think it's important as we look at this question that we send China a single, short, clear message. You will never prevail over the United States.
Your reading of today, this has been, as we say, a chaotic White House. I'm not sure which day was more chaotic than today, with the loss, the removal, firing, resignation, whatever it was, of the president's criminal defense lawyer, clearly the firing of the national security advisor, and his quickly named replacement.
Lawrence, the President Trump likes to shake things up, and today was the day in which he succeeded in shaking a lot of things up. In the news, it seems to me that the more significant move for the country is this change to replace H.R. McMaster with John Bolton. My tenure in the White House, Lawrence, gave me a front row seat to seeing how presidents and their national security advisors work so closely together to formulate the national security strategy of the country. I flew around the world on Air Force One with Susan Rice. She sat in the chair next to me for many of those trips. She was the person who prepared the briefing materials for the President of the United States. She signed off on them, at least. She was the person who was flying on the plane. Oftentimes, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, or the CIA directors flying on their own plane. She was the last person to speak to the President of the United States before he'd walk into a meeting with a foreign leader, and she was the person who was sitting next to President Obama when he sat down across the table from other world leaders. If you remember that famous photo of President Obama interacting with Vladimir Putin at the G20 a couple years ago, it was not a previously planned meeting. It was a still photo of that meeting, and the only other person that's pictured that photo other than Barack Obama and Vladimir Putin was Susan Rice. So, John Bolton didn't have exactly a stellar tenure during his first go-around in the federal government, in the executive branch. But boy, we as a country have a lot riding on him this time, because there are a lot of times where he's going to be putting his head together with Donald Trump, and the two of them are going to be cooking up really important decisions. So we're counting on you, John.
That's a lot to count on. Ron Klain, I want to get your reaction to both of these moves today. I want to note that in Michael Wolff's book, Fire and Fury, the problem, Steve Bannon was pushing John Bolton to be the national security advisor, and the problem that Donald Trump had with John Bolton was his mustache, according to Steve Bannon in Fire and Fury. The other revelation in Fire and Fury was that about H.R. McMaster, Donald Trump said, he bores the crap out of me, and I cleaned that one up a little bit. Yeah. But Ron, with your experience in the White House, I want you to talk about the change in White House National Security Advisor, but also this legal change. The top criminal defense lawyer in the Trump team is out today. What does that mean?
Well, the day began with the president threatening to beat up to crying the former vice president.
Yes.
And it ends without that being one of the top 5 craziest things that happened today.
Ron, I have to say that these comments about Biden, the tweet about beating up Biden, is now officially old news. It happened before noontime, I believe. Yeah. So
look, I think we saw 2 big changes. And while I certainly agree with Josh that for the country and for our national security, this move of putting John Bolton, a man who hasn't found a country on earth he doesn't want to launch a war against, in as national security advisor is probably scarier. But I do think this move of pushing out John Dowd and bringing in a TV conspiracist as the president's chief lawyer is a clear signal of a second front in the Trump White House. They are loading up to fire Bob Mueller or to fight the special counsel in some other kind of way. And instead of handling this as a legal matter, they're getting ready to handle this as a PR matter. They're getting ready to to handle this as a political matter. They brought in Joe DeGenoa. They brought in his wife. They are TV lawyers, and these TV lawyers are expected to do on a government salary what they used to do for Fox News, which is to go on Fox and explain crazy conspiracies, craziness of Trump, and try to sell that to Trump's base. And that's what Trump is readying the country for.
And Chris Whipple, you've written a book about White House chiefs of staff. And here we have the president today, apparently being reported by NBC News that he is actually thinking about not just getting rid of John Kelly, but also not replacing him, because Trump is now starting to think he doesn't need a White House chief of staff. Imagine for us the Trump White House without a White House chief of staff. And you've spent a lot of time talking to Reince Priebus about how it works.
Try to imagine it. I mean, you know, the thing is, it's no surprise that Donald Trump wants to get rid of his chief of staff and to be his own chief of staff, because he doesn't want any grown-ups in the room. He's tired of being told what he can't do. But history is littered with the wreckage of presidencies that tried to do something like that, to operate according to a kind of spokes of the wheel with the president at the center, everybody coming and going. It's never worked. You know, John Kennedy tried it until he ran into the Bay of Pigs. Afterwards, he leaned on his brother Bobby as a de facto chief. LBJ ran into Vietnam. There was nobody to speak hard truths to LBJ. So it's a model that has failed time and again. And all you have to do is look at the first 6 months of the Trump presidency, where the model was the 26th floor of Trump Tower with everybody coming and going and nobody empowered. That'll tell you what it's like to govern without a White House chief of staff.
Josh Earnest, the Trump White House without a White House chief of staff. I mean, one thing I'm wondering about is, from our perspective, from sitting out here, would anything at all appear to be different? Could it possibly appear to be more chaotic if the White House chief of staff job was empty?
Well, you know, Lawrence, I don't know that it would have much of an impact on President Trump's public image, but it would have a profound impact on the inner workings of the White House. And, you know, one of the challenges that John Kelly has accepted and has actually fared relatively well in managing is trying to manage the intense staff-level rivalries inside the White House. Remember, there was basically open war in the halls of the West Wing when Reince Priebus was the chief of staff, and you had the Bannon wing and the Kushner wing, and General Kelly, for all of his faults, and he's got many of them, has actually been able to, in many ways, put a lid on all that, in some cases by firing people like Steve Bannon. So I do fear, and I think this would be a legitimate fear of everybody who works in the West Wing, that removing him as chief of staff would actually take the lid off all those rivalries again. And as difficult a place as the White House is to work, even under the best of circumstances, it would get far, far worse for the people that have to show up there every day.
Ron Klain, there's reporting indicating that John Kelly opposed the choice of John Bolton as National Security Advisor. We know that John Kelly blocked John Bolton's freelance access to the president that was going on before John Kelly became the chief of staff. And so it looks like this choice of Bolton could be the beginning of the counting of the days for John Kelly.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've learned over the past couple of days that when Sarah Sanders goes out and says the president thinks you're doing a great job, it's time to brush up your LinkedIn profile. And, you know, I think that time could be coming for John Kelly. Look, I have a lot of disagreements with John Kelly on matters of domestic policy in particular, but we got to give him this. He is a military man who understands the huge cost, the human cost of war, and was not a war hawk. And I think seeing John Bolton come into the White House with his proposals for a preemptive strike against North Korea, for war with Iran. He even wrote recently about the idea of war with Cuba. I mean, this is a person who is going to get this country into a military conflict, and I don't think that's what John Kelly wants. And I do think this is a sign that John Kelly may indeed be on the way out.
Chris, on April 9th, John Bolton will be in there as the National Security Advisor, and we know, based on the pattern, he's going to be Donald Trump's favorite new toy. There's going to be a favorite in the White House on April 9th, and it's going to be the new guy. The interesting thing is he's there every day. He's in a physical position for the president to, in effect, start leaning on John Bolton as a de facto White House chief of staff and make him be the traffic cop.
Here's the really troubling thing about it. You know, Reagan once said about his fractious White House that the right wing doesn't know what the far right wing is doing. Well, this shows that the far right wing has won. It's prevailed. Bolton is a terrible choice for National Security Advisor because that person has to be, above all else, the so-called honest broker of information on every side of a national security issue. You can't. The model is Brent Scowcroft under Bush 41. You never put your thumb on the scale. Bolton is a hard-right ideologue. And quite frankly, we have a White House chief of staff who has also reinforced all of Donald Trump's most partisan instincts. So competent people are headed for the exits. Hard right ideologues are coming in, and it's really a recipe for disaster.
Chris Whipple, Josh Earnest, Ron Klain, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it.